Today's story takes us to Upper Peninsula, Michigan, a unique region in the United States. It is surrounded by three Great Lakes on three sides and the state of Wisconsin on one side. The area is full of forests, lakes, and rivers, making it a popular destination for outdoor activities. It is known for its scenic beauty, recreational opportunities, and cultural heritage. The Upper Peninsula is also home to many historical sites, including lighthouses and museums, which offer insight into the region's past. But this picturesque area has had its dark secrets as well, and Thanksgiving Day of 1992 would signify one of them. It was October 16, 1957, when Judy Diane Blake was born in a conservative family in Hancock, Michigan. Judy had always been adored as the only daughter of her parents, Dale and Marianne Blake. Her two brothers, Jerry and David, also doted on her. Aside from being active members of the Redeemer Free Lutheran Church, Judy's parents operated a business called Dale's Service, which helped them provide their children with a quality life in a home full of love. Judy soon grew up to be a beautiful young woman, looking forward to having her own family. Judy met the love of her life, Bruce Moylan, in 1974. Both of them were working in healthcare, with Judy taking up a nursing job and Bruce working as support staff. Bruce was 3 years older than Judy and was the polar opposite of her. While Judy was shy and sweet, Bruce, on the other hand, was outgoing and confident. Unlike Judy's tight-knit and religious family, Bruce did not have a close relationship with his family. Despite the obvious differences, the two hit it off. While Judy admired his confidence, Bruce saw her as the perfect girl to settle down with. However, Judy's family was not as sure about Bruce as she was. Despite this, Judy and Bruce got married in 1978. In the years that followed, Judy's family would leave no stone unturned in trying to make him a part of their family, and it seemed like Bruce also got along with them very well. The family welcomed a new member when Judy gave birth to her only daughter, Elise, in 1989. For the next few years, they shared a happy life together, but they had no clue all of that was about to change forever. It was November 29, 1992, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and Judy and Bruce were visiting the Blakes along with little Elise. It was also the last day of the hunting season of that year in the Upper Peninsula area. So that Sunday morning, Bruce, along with Judy's brothers, headed out to the nearby woods to track deer, while Judy stayed behind with her mother and daughter. Sometime in the afternoon, Judy took a group of her own Springer Spaniels and her parents' dog, Streak, for a walk in the woods behind the property that the Blakes owned on Highway 38 in Ontonagon County, Michigan. Bidding her goodbye, Marianne did not realize that this was the last time she would ever see her daughter. When 2.5 hours passed with no sign of Judy, Marianne began to grow worried for her daughter's well-being. Although Judy was familiar with the woods, there was a possibility that she met with an accident or got into some trouble, especially considering that it was still hunting season. Taking a neighbor with her, Marianne went down into the woods looking for her daughter. The two women were trying to retrace Judy's steps along the walking path, which was becoming harder and harder to do as it was rapidly getting dark. After almost an hour, Marianne came across a grisly scene that no mother should ever have to witness. Along one of the trails, around 500 to 600 feet into the woods, Marianne and the neighbor found Judy, who was lying motionless on her side. Nearby, Judy's dogs were wandering around by themselves. As they turned her onto her back, they saw a bloody chest wound. It was obvious that Judy was already gone. Screaming her lungs out, Marianne ran back to the house and reported the unfortunate incident to the local authorities. Investigators soon discovered that it was a gunshot wound that killed Judy. Though the night was getting colder by the hour, cops were out in the woods searching for evidence with nothing but flashlights in their hands. However, even after combing through the entire area, detectives did not find many clues. The bullet that killed Judy could not be found either. However, they did come across one significant clue: a blaze mark on a maple tree. Bob Ball, the lead detective assigned to the case, determined that the blaze mark could be made by the same bullet that had killed Judy. He believed that if he could find the bullet, he could retrace it back to the shooter, which would help them understand how Judy was shot. Forensic tests of these scrapings would later show that the mark had indeed been caused by a bullet strike. Based on the body's location and the blaze mark, investigators also came to the conclusion that the bullet had hit Judy first, traveled through her heart, exited the body through her left side, hit the tree, and finally landed somewhere in the woods. At the time, the incident was considered a tragic accident. Investigators believed that an unknown hunter's errant bullet killed Judy, which was not unusual in that area of the Upper Peninsula. In fact, there had been a couple of deer hunting incidents in that area prior to this. But unfortunately, it was a very difficult task to locate the person responsible for Judy's untimely demise, considering the fact that bullets from the high-powered rifles used for hunting can often travel up to 3 miles or more. Most of the time, hunters do not even realize that their bullets have killed a person. Despite the assumption, Detective Ball wanted to keep an open mind. While Judy's body was taken to the medical examiner's office, detectives shifted their attention to interviewing the family members. While everyone seemed gravely upset by the tragedy, one unusual comment left Detective Ball uneasy, and it came from Bruce, who was being critical of his deceased wife for not being more careful and not wearing orange inside the woods. Bruce came under the radar of suspicion anyway, since most of the time, in the case of a brutal crime, suspicion goes to the person closest to the victim. But at the same time, he knew that it could very much have just been a mourning husband who didn't know how to express his grief. Additionally, Judy's family insisted that Bruce was with them during the whole day. They were absolutely sure that Bruce had nothing to do with their daughter's death. In fact, they were even unhappy with the police for eyeing him as a suspect. It was just the beginning of the twists and turns in this mind-boggling case. It was 2 days later that the autopsy report revealed a crucial detail. The estimated time of death was around 3 p.m. As Detective Ball went back to re-interview the Blake family with the new information, they revealed that although Bruce was with them for most of the day, they did not have an eye on him around that particular time. But that did not raise any alarm bells for the Blake family. They wholeheartedly believed in his innocence, and they were really vocal about their opinion. In fact, they were not happy with the investigation, since they believed police had targeted the wrong man who was still mourning his wife's loss. Though it was unknown to Judy's family at the time, the detectives had another reason to believe that Judy's death was no accident. Based on the trajectory of the bullet and forensic evidence, it was determined that the bullet passed through the body at an upward angle, since the entrance wound was 1 inch lower than the exit wound. This finding was crucial to the case because if a hunter had fired the shot, the bullet would have gone in a downward angle through the body, as it would have been coming from a much further distance. It was almost certain now that Judy had been killed intentionally. But was it really Bruce, or was he just becoming a victim of the detective's tunnel vision? Based on this new finding, and with his alibi in question, detectives wanted a closer look at Bruce Moylan. On December 11th, 1992, just 12 days into the investigation, Bruce was invited to the sheriff's office for a formal interview. After just a few minutes in the interview with Bob Ball, Bruce had given him a detailed account of his whereabouts on the day of his wife's death, including naming almost 30 different people who had seen him that day. However, among his meticulous timeline of the day, there was a gap, a missing 30 minutes that he couldn't account for. Although he kept saying that he had nothing to do with his wife's death, Detective Ball became suspicious about him. This interview led him to wonder whether it was the deer in his sight that afternoon, or was he aiming for something else? While the question of his innocence was still hanging there, Bruce's behavior kept indicating otherwise. Not only did he not observe much of a mourning period, but within a couple of weeks of Judy's death, he was also wandering around on ski trips, hanging out with friends, and even hitting on some of Judy's friends instead of taking care of his daughter. By this time, even Judy's family had become suspicious of him despite their initial support. Needless to say, his behavior was to blame for this. Detectives were also diligently working on the case, but they were not able to find any hard proof against him. In an attempt to obtain something, Detective Ball requested a few of Bruce's friends and co-workers to secretly keep tabs on him and report back to the police if they found anything suspicious. This was how they came across a bombshell discovery. One of the calls Detective Ball made included 35-year-old Gail Lampanen, who was a co-worker of Bruce, and she had quite the story to tell the detectives about Bruce. Shortly after the funeral, Bruce showed up at Gail's house uninvited. He had 5 boxes with him filled with his dead wife's belongings. After dropping the boxes on Gail's porch, Bruce walked off before Gail could question him further. Since it was holiday time, Gail left the boxes outside for a while and paid no attention to them. When she finally opened the boxes, she noticed that they were mostly filled with Judy's clothes. But in one of those boxes, beneath the clothing, Gail found a letter dated 6 months earlier and signed by Judy. Finding the letter was very unusual for Gail, since she had met Judy only once. But what was even stranger was what the letter contained. It started by saying that Judy wanted Gail to have her old clothes as keepsake gifts, as she believed that Gail was the only person Bruce trusted. It then went on to say many intimate details about the marriage of Bruce and Judy, and how the pair did not see things the same anymore and were on the verge of separating. It even said that Bruce needed a new girlfriend. But the oddest part of all was that the writer ended the letter by noting that Bruce was incredible in the sack. The letter immediately gave Gail the impression that something was not right. Needless to say, the detectives felt the same. To check the authenticity of the letter, detectives took it to a forensic document examiner, James Stegall, who was tasked with comparing the letter with Judy's known handwriting sample to determine if the letter was indeed written by Judy. Handwriting analysis suggested that the writing in the letter was slow and deliberate, possibly indicating a forgery. Judy was ruled out as the writer of the letter, but the writing could not be conclusively linked to Bruce either. Failing to gain any solid evidence against Bruce, detectives were forced to work with the limited resources they had. In an attempt to gather more information, Detective Ball decided to approach Gail once again. In further interviews, Gail revealed to the investigators that Bruce had been vying for her attention for a long time, even before Judy's death. But Gail, who was happily married to her husband, only considered him very irritating and persistent. While Bruce kept hitting on her, she just kept ignoring him and hoped that someday he'd go away. But Gail was not the only one who disliked him. No one had anything good to say about Bruce. He spent his time flirting with other female employees at his workplace, and almost everybody tried to avoid him. His coworkers often complained that he was difficult to work with. Gail also revealed that after his wife's death, he bragged about his soon-to-be fortune. In Gail's eyes, it was nothing but his clumsy attempt to seduce her into having a relationship with him. This information was enough for Detective Ball to dig deeper into Moylan's marriage. They expected that the couple would have had regular arguments, considering Bruce's flirtation at his workplace. Yet, they found no evidence that Judy had any knowledge of Bruce's inappropriate behavior toward his female coworkers. However, detectives also learned about the Moylans' financial problems in the months prior to Judy's death, which were all caused by Bruce. Due to his irresponsible nature and overspending, Bruce had become heavily indebted. The situation deteriorated so much that he had no option left but to borrow money from one source to pay off another. During the entire span of their marriage, Judy had always coped well with the financial troubles thanks to her own earnings, but she had finally reached her limit, begun to get fed up with Bruce at this point, especially with the added responsibility of their daughter. Detectives also discovered that weeks prior to Judy's death, Bruce began stockpiling insurance policies in Judy's name. Several of those policies had a double indemnity clause, which meant that if Judy died in an accidental death, the policy would pay twice as much. Detective Ball wondered whether Bruce saw this as an opportunity to get rid of his financial troubles as well as his wife. And indeed, after Judy's death, Bruce was on the verge of obtaining a fine financial payout worth $330,000 from Judy's life insurance policies. But what investigators learned next sent a chill down their spine. It turned out that in 1991, nearly 14 months before Judy's death, she had met with a tragic accident. An 85-pound chimney block accidentally slid off a roof where Bruce was working, hitting Judy's head and almost killing her. Luckily, she had survived the attack with only a severe concussion and a few days in the hospital. In a shocking turn of events, shortly after this incident, a fire broke out in the Moylan house when Judy was sleeping alone inside the home. Once again, with a stroke of luck, Judy would survive this danger by waking up in time and calling the fire department. Judy was scared after these two incidents. Several of Judy's friends told the detectives that Judy had confided in them that she wanted to leave her husband, though she had a premonition that something bad was happening around her. She stayed in the marriage for the sake of their daughter. Judy's family, however, were unaware of her feelings about all of this. By this time, Detective Bob Ball was almost certain that Bruce Moylan had killed his own wife and made it look like a hunting accident. But, unfortunately, he did not have any physical evidence to prove it. Desperate, he called Dan Castle, a person who specialized in metal detectors and had assisted law enforcement on many occasions. Knowing that the fatal bullet was still somewhere in the woods, Detective Ball asked him to help find it. Dan got to work with his metal detector every day, but it seemed that he had finally met his match this time when he did not find anything after weeks of searching. The layers of snow had completely covered any trace of the bullet. Despite his failure, Dan was not ready to let go of this mission. Pursuing an experiment, Dan decided to use a slingshot to recreate the trajectory of the bullet in order to zero in on the exact location where the bullet could have gone. And in a stroke of luck, his idea worked. As he searched the general area where his marbles had ricocheted on the snow, he was finally able to find the bullet around 80 feet from the maple tree. While the discovery was remarkable itself, authorities had yet to determine whether it was the same bullet that killed Judy or simply another that had been shot during the hunting season. Ray Kenny, a firearm examiner from Marquette State Police Crime Lab, was given the task of analyzing the bullet. He found some critical details within days. It was a .30 caliber round from the moss and wood fibers. Kenny determined that it was the same bullet that struck the tree, but more evidence was trapped inside. Kenny found a tiny single pink fiber that belonged to the shirt Judy was wearing, as well as some black fiber that belonged to Judy's jacket. The link was finally made, and this was an incredible break in the case. The next target for the investigators was Bruce's notable gun collection. They tested all of the rifles that could have possibly fired the fatal bullet and identified 4 possible firearms. Bruce had nowhere to run but to tell the truth at this point, yet still he chose to lie. He denied owning any of those rifles, only to find that his luck had run out. In Judy and Bruce's financial records, there were loan papers where his gun collection was listed as collateral. Detectives also recovered an asset list, which listed a gun that Bruce failed to disclose. The gun, which was a rifle with a scope, was consistent with one of the 4 possible rifles that could have fired that bullet. So eventually, investigators came to a conclusion about the firearm, theorizing that it was the most likely murder weapon. Detectives knew that finding out the truth was very crucial at this point. On April 23, 1993, 5 months into the investigation, Bruce finally agreed to take a polygraph test. After months of making excuses and avoiding the process, during the initial phase of the polygraph, Bruce remained calm as he answered. The investigators, desperate to get the truth out of him, placed the letter that came from Gail on the table in front of him. This proved to be the turning point of the interview, as Bruce was ready to tell a different story for the first time. The realization that Gail was working with the police behind his back, or the fear that authorities had finally gotten to him with tears in his eyes, Bruce finally confessed to murdering his wife. After months of denial, he revealed that on the fatal day of November 29, 1992, he had seen the perfect opportunity to get rid of his wife. However, he also claimed that the first 2 times he spotted Judy through the trees, he aimed his gun but couldn't bring himself to shoot. The 3rd time, though, he closed his eyes and pulled the trigger, delivering the deadly blow. While sharing his motive for the murder, Bruce said Judy had threatened to divorce him, and he simply didn't want to split up. In an effort to justify his actions, he said that Judy was a tyrant at work and at home, in addition to being a bad cook. About the murder weapon, Bruce claimed that he disposed of the rifle in a nearby river, but police could not find it after searching through the water. He was also able to correct an error in the medical examiner's report. While the report said Judy was shot in the left side of her chest, Bruce claimed that she was in fact shot in the right side of her chest, and the bullet exited from the left side. This was a key point in his confession because he was able to point out something that would have only been known to the killer. Bruce Moylan was immediately arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Shockingly, despite his confession, he pleaded not guilty, claiming cops coerced the confession out of him. Although prosecutors had plenty of evidence against Bruce, they still decided to gather some more in preparation for the trial. Investigators had recreated the chimney block incident. Bruce had previously claimed that he accidentally moved it with his foot, but they determined it was too heavy and needed a deliberate push in order to fall off the roof. With dozens of witnesses and evidence, the trial mostly went in favor of the prosecution. While Bruce stayed put most of the time, he started crying when Gail took the stand. The defense, on the other hand, didn't have a single person to put on the stand. Bruce's lawyer, Thomas Castleman, claimed that all of his witnesses negated because of fear. He called the investigation a witch hunt and accused the cops of wrongfully obtaining the confession. As expected, the jury did not buy Bruce's story, and on December 15, 1993, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. On January 21, 1994, Bruce Moylan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The punishment brought solace to Judy's family, who had once even protested his innocence. Judy's brother and sister-in-law, David and Yvonne Blake, adopted 5-year-old Elise. So there you have it, the downfall of a man driven by his greed, who assumed that he could pull off the perfect murder. Do you think, if not for the diligent effort of the investigators, this murder would have always been considered a tragic accident? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below,